Welcome back to Season 2 of the Spiritable podcast. My name is Luke.
I'm Richard. I'm getting a master's in divinity. On this show, we try to bring spiritual ideas down to earth.
We're all trying to be better people and grow, so get on board.
Great to meet you.
3, 2, 1. Spiritable. So this is Luke talking. I'm one of the hosts.
This is Richard. It's great to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on. It's so exciting to talk to you. And, we've, I've grown up hearing your name, so it's exciting to actually have a conversation.
Well, thank you, Luke. I mean, that's so sweet, but you will quickly learn I'm just a regular confused person like the rest.
Oh, how the mighty do fall.
Yeah, I tell you, I've just, all that stuff about self-esteem, I've never believed that. I try to keep my self-esteem as low as possible.
Interesting. I feel like that's a good way of being, keep yourself humble.
It is. It's much better.
Well, fantastic. Before we get started with the episode, I wanted to just go over a couple of things with you to get you some experience with what our podcast is about and start off on the same page.
Good.
Cool. So basically our podcast is called Spiritable, which is spirit able. The ethos is to just bring spirituality down to earth and have a grounded conversation about what belief is.
Cool.
Yeah. Richard, do you want to give an overview about our religion real quick, just so he knows where we're coming from?
Yeah. So, I mean, you've come and talked in the Bernathen area before, correct?
I have. Oh, so this is Swedenborgians. Great.
Yeah, that's where we're coming from.
Terrific.
Yes. So, as much as you know about our faith, we both are members of that faith. I actually just finished my theological school program
Today.
Terrific.
So I'm going to be ordained any day now, and I'm going to be a minister, which is exciting.
He's growing up. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bio, and then we're going to get rolling here.
Great. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to introduce you, and you can tell me if I mess anything up drastically. All right, our guest today is Dr. Raymond Moody. Dr. Raymond Moody is a prominent author, thinker, philosopher, and physician, arguably most well-known for his book Life After Life and his research into the afterlife. He pioneered the term near-death experience, which is widely used vernacular in spiritual circles and religious discussion groups. With a BA and a PhD in philosophy and another PhD in psychology, experience as a practicing psychiatrist in a maximum security state hospital, Dr. Raymond Moody is arguably the most well-known researcher on this topic. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you guys. What a pleasure. Thank you.
So you ready for the first spiritual icebreaker?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, this is one that we have had on, I think, every episode that we've been doing spiritual icebreakers. What is your best or worst spiritual experience?
My best or worst spiritual experience?
Yeah, and you can take a minute to think about it if you need.
Well, there are so many of them, but I've had, I think a personal experience with God was about the best. Yeah, that's the most amazing one. Just felt the Spirit of God right there with me. Yeah, that was about 1991.
Yeah, I would hope that would be the best experience. It would be sad if that was the worst experience.
And I've had a lot of them. I've had a lot of spiritual experiences over the years. But, I don't pay too much attention to them. I mean, in the sense that...
Kind of old hat, or?
Yeah, this world is, it comes at you so relentlessly that I sort of take note of them. But, the daily life is just so busy and full of things that I think I just sort of trust completely that God is, I talk to him every morning and every evening, and sometimes several times during the day. Mm-hmm. And so my take is I'm not so worried about any particular belief system or ideology because I figured I never will. When I was 8 years old, I had 7 or 8, I had a very profound experience looking through a telescope.
Oh.
And decided at that moment that I wanted to be an astronomer, but that never happened. I ended up being a philosophy major and philosophy professor, and then later on a medical doctor instead. But I remember looking through that telescope and realizing at about the age of 7 or 8 that I would never know much of anything. And that's okay with me.
At 8 years old, that's pretty impressive. That's a lot of humility.
well, I mean, I've always loved to learn things.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, what did you see in the telescope?
Well, it was just looking out into a star field, really. I mean, you saw like all this just vast field of stars. Yeah.
Just feeling the smallness of yourself and the vastness of the universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a powerful thing. Did you have anything that stood out to you as a negative spiritual experience? I know those can be hard to talk about, but sometimes they're pretty interesting.
Well, nothing really comes to mind.
Hey,
no.
That's great.
Yeah. I've had plenty of negative experiences in my life, but I don't think of anything.
Have you ever had any doubts of your faith or belief?
Well, you guys, this is going to sound very, very evasive or something, but it's really not.
No worries.
I try to entertain as few beliefs as possible because, belief is not what people think it is. They seem to refer to some internal thing or something. But I was a professor of epistemology and philosophy of language, and to me, when you say I believe that something, you're not reporting on an inner state. I believe that such and such is one of a whole range of similar expressions, like I know that such and such, I believe that such and such, I suspect that such and such, I assume that such and such. And what those are, they're not reporting on inner states. What they're doing is they're conveying to your hearer what degree of confidence they can put on what follows that based on your say-so. So I'm not into beliefs. A lot of times people ask me, Raymond, do you believe that God exists? And I say, absolutely not, because I, Raymond Moody, am a very limited person, and any belief I could come up with about God would be bound to be off base. What I say is, and also, if you think about that sentence, do you believe that God exists? Well, the emphasis of that sentence is on the word exist. As a logician, I could sit down and take about an hour, but I could explain to you what the concept of existence is, and even how to symbolize it and how it fits into the logical framework. But that's just a human concept. God is greater than existence, in my opinion. That is that existence is a human term that we use here. And I don't think that term limits God.
Well, also, and what you're getting at, it relates back to the humility that you started out saying. And it's something that I think we both agree with as well, is that I never, to use the word believe, I never fully believe people when they say they 100% are certain of something, because as humans, we are infallible, we can fail. And we don't know everything, so there's a certain amount of humility you need to be able to say that.
I think that it's a lot of times when people come on for me with that sort of strong certainty, I realize that underneath they're just as uncertain about
insecurity
as I am. Right? That's right. It's like, to me, it's just so easy to say I don't know.
Well, and it's easier to start off on a conversation if you can both agree that you don't know everything, and both of you are trying your best to be your best selves.
That's right. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Awesome.
Yeah, I definitely see belief as more of a choice on the ideas we choose to make actionable for us, meaning like God could exist or he could not. I choose the actionable ideas of God existing, and thus I am involved in a religious organization, and I read the word and I pray. And so I guess my question for you is do you have beliefs Or do you have ideas that you act on, whether you that you make actionable for yourself, whether you call them beliefs or not?
Well, you know something, you guys, I'm 75, and I'm just a lot more relaxed about things than I used to be. I mean, I had 2 doctoral degrees before I was 31. Plus, 3 of those years I'd been a philosophy professor. So when y'all get my age, you'll realize that there was something really wrong with somebody who would have 2 doctoral degrees.
Talk about it.
And I know the Swedenborgians, which I really love about them, they are so intellectual. And I just love that. I just love that. I love being up there and talking with you guys because it's, it is a very intellectual religion.
Mm-hmm.
And,
which has its pros and cons.
Art and scholars and, so, and I have gotten to the point where I'm not as intellectual as I used to be. I still love, it's so funny. You guys should be very happy about coming up into the 70s because contrary to the press it gets, it's really the most wonderful time of life.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What's the highlight of being in your 70s?
Well, I mean, it's just like you've seen almost everything, right? Uh-huh. And things don't get to you as much as they once did, and I'm not...
you feel like you're a more evolved person at this point?
Yeah. Well, maybe evolved, but maybe just, it's like I have gotten to the point where I can just take up a book and I can read it like zap and absorb it. Where I think back to my 20s when I was in college, reading a book could be, it was something you really had to put a lot of effort into and keep concentrating as. Whereas now, when I pick up a new book, I just zap and it's in there. And what I attribute that to is I talked to my doctor about it, and this is what he came up with too, is that at this age you just have so much information in there that any new thing that comes along, you can just fit it into the system you already have.
Interesting. So, do you feel like that is sometimes a detriment to your process of learning new things if you can only fit it into your existing,
Well, not really, because I still, I am adventurous too. I'm also reading all kinds of books on subjects that I'd never heard of before. You guys, I can just tell you, are intellectuals because I know everybody I've ever met from Baranathan is an intellectual. And so,
that's very kind of you.
So what you will find is that your mind is even sharper. I don't know what it is, but at 75, I'm sharper than I was even when I was in graduate school in philosophy 50 years ago.
I'm so happy to hear that because there are a lot of people.
Oh yeah, it's just great.
Yeah, no, I'm super happy for you. That actually leads into my next question. I wanted to go around the table here and ask this next icebreaker for everyone, which is, what is a bad habit that you'd like to break? Maybe I'll start with myself to give you guys some time to think. But recently, I'm a very kind of energetic, hyper-focused person, and it's hard for me to find places to relax and have that sort of 75-year-old mindset of letting the world come and being kind of easy breezy. And though I like the way I live, I can often exhaust myself just by being around myself. So I'm trying to find, I guess, healthy ways of stepping back a little bit and just trying to take it easy on myself and let the world come a little bit more. Richard, do you have any bad habits you're trying to break?
Yeah, actually, it's a more of a physical one and less of a mental one.
Okay.
But I have, for as long as I can remember, chewed on my tongue when I'm focusing. Like I kind of just chew on the side of my tongue. Well, yeah, I crack my knuckles and wrists. It's a whole thing. I'm not trying to break that. It's fun. But my wife was always like, "Oh, it's so gross. It's so weird. It's so bad." And I'm like, I don't know. Is it? And I made the mistake of Googling chewing tongue bad and ended up on WebMD. And it was talking about the loss of taste function.
Oh no.
And the different stuff that can happen from consistent tongue chewing. And so I was like, oh no, my taste. And so I've been trying to break that habit.
Okay.
I don't think
That's a toughie.
I don't think it's actually gonna matter, but now I've spooked myself about it, so I'm trying to break it.
Dr. Moody, any bad habits you're trying to break?
Well, I am much better in my procrastination than I used to be, but that's still one that gets to me.
I'll tell you, if you had two
Get into that.
PhDs by the time you were 31, I don't know if procrastination is high on your list, sir.
Well, it kind of is, because you know what procrastination is all about is it occurs in compulsive personalities, right?
Mm.
And what the most scary thing for a person with a obsessional compulsive personality is the fear of being caught up in a mistake, because we just don't want to be mistaken. That's why the obsessives, if you had a parent who was obsessive, for example, instead of just saying we're going to such and such for our vacation, they order 30 packets from chambers of commerce,
Right,
and then create a big, chart with advantages and disadvantages. And finally, the wife or whoever says, "Well, decide already," and so they just go on and decide, right? And the reason for that is that you can always then have an excuse, right? If the decision turns out to be wrong, you can always go back and say, "Well, I just didn't have time to gather my data."
right.
So that's what we
I fall into that.
I bet you guys fall into
Yeah,
that.
no, I definitely see that.
Yeah.
I often think that there aren't enough hours in the day.
Afraid that we shouldn't be, we're so afraid of making a mistake. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Whenever I buy anything that costs any amount of money, I first do like 8 to 10 hours of research about every possible.
Don't even. I will stand for 10 minutes in the bean aisle, price shopping the beans.
And not only that, when you get home, you still have buyer's remorse, right? We could have gotten the other one instead.
See, I don't suffer from buyer's remorse. The moment I buy something, it is the best thing I've ever owned.
Really?
And I'm like, everyone should have this
really
thing.
great.
It's the greatest. I did my research.
I will do that if I can get a significant deal. Like I got ground turkey for $3 off a pound. I saved $20. I was pumped.
You're exactly my father. One point, my dad came home from the store with, I think, like 16 cans of tuna. We were like, "Dad."
He was like, "I paid $3.50 for all of these."
Yeah. We're like, "Dad, no one even likes tuna that much." I know we still have some of those tuna cans.
All right, Dr. Moody, I have a last icebreaker for you, and then we'll get into more of your life and spiritual experiences. Okay, last question. Actually, Richard, you wanna do the last question?
Yeah, sure. So, it's 20 years from now, and the big blockbuster movie of this summer is the story of Raymond Moody's life.
Oh, my.
Who would you want playing the leading role?
Holy mackerel. Well, by that time, they'll probably have everything animated.
Oh. Well, I will have you know, I am an actor, and my availability 20 years from now is open.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to put in a request right now. But,
I'll talk to my agent.
Right. But I don't know. I'm just, I've always had a hard time understanding. I understand that I am a celebrity, but it's never poked through into, I had a very interesting experience, which retrospectively I realized was like an encounter with God or the presence of God. And I was about 11 years old. And I remember at that moment, a feeling came over me and a thought. And the thought was, oh my God, it would be so terrible to be famous. Because I am basically kind of a social phobic guy,
Interesting.
And shyness has been a lifelong thing with me. But in retrospect, I realized that was God kind of. And what God was saying, not in a cruel way. I mean, he was just saying, well, let's see, right? that was not what I wanted. But then a few years later, I had it, right? And I have to say that my perception was right. It is a terrible thing. And then on the other hand, I've got to admit that I've met some of the most wonderful people in the world because I never would have gotten to. I met the dean up there in Brent Athens, and he and his wife had us for dinner. It was just wonderful,
Aw.
you know. In like many other cases like that, where people I've met, that even though fame is not what I wanted, the fact that it's come, I mean, there have been some disadvantages too, but it provides such an opportunity to
Well, I think that's a very healthy
meet
way of
wonderful.
looking at it. Yeah, of using your status for good and to make useful connections and to spread love. Like, that's great.
Yeah, I'm not sure though that I'm humble. To me, it's more like to me, the very few things I've learned in psychiatry, right? But one of them I've definitely learned is ego equals pain.
Mm.
Just think about it. Whenever your ego is involved, there's always some painful aspect of it too, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So ego equals pain. And normal is somebody you don't know very well. That's another thing I've discovered.
I like
Whenever
that.
you're saying it's like,
I like
he's
that a lot.
normal, you mean I don't know him very well, right? Because as soon as you meet somebody you think they're normal, then you spend the weekend with them at the beach, and then you're pulling your hair out, right? Because everybody's nuts to some degree.
That is true.
That's an experience that I've constantly had with people meeting Luke for the first time, and then being like, he's such like a put together, like normal, like he's just like he's just a guy, and I'm like, oh man, he's got a lot going on. We all do. You don't know Luke.
him first. He's a little
Yeah,
crazy.
I just think, I mean, and I can honestly say I'm finished with ego. And I mean, that in itself sounds like an egotistical statement, right? Which it would be if I could say, well, I'm finished with ego because
Yeah.
I went up to the Himalayas and I laid on the bed of nails and I did the chants. Well, that's not how it happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm finished with ego is that I pretty much nearly killed myself with it. I had such a bad case of it. And my specific ego trip was jealousy.
Mm.
But, you know, once you're finished with one ego trip, I think one ego trip is enough. And mine was jealousy, and I think anybody who sort of has been through a terrible ego trip will realize that. And so, you know, I try to do everything I can to, you know, I'm just finished with myself, you know. I'm sick and tired of Raymond Moody.
I get that. It's actually funny. Ego is one of the reasons that I love acting, and it seems sort of counterintuitive because a lot of people think of actors as sort of vain, egocentric people. But for me, whenever I have a role that I can kind of dissolve myself in, it's an opportunity to very concretely put ego aside and not care about how you're being perceived and just fully become something else and leave all that expectation behind. So for me, it's always been a great exercise to remove my ego from myself and become something else. It's a very humbling process, honestly.
Yes, really. I've talked to a lot of actors about that very thing because I'm very interested in. I ask actors all the time, when you do a role, do you sort of get inside that person and become that person, or is it that you have a series of techniques you learned in acting school and you say, well, to be angry you do this and so on? And what most of them say is that it's a mixture, right? And that it's like indwelling another person. I got to know a really wonderful, well, she wasn't an actress, she was an opera singer, but back in the 70's when my book came out, she got in touch with me and she said, she was telling about her near-death experience, and she was saying that she said, you know, Raymond, she was very famous for some particular role. I don't remember which, because I sort of lost track of music after Elvis and Gene Autry kind of stopped recording myself. So
it peaked for you, and it was all downhill after that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not much on music, and she understood that. But she was saying that after this, she had been doing this one role for so long. Then this one evening, that was the last she sang that role. And then she walked off the stage. And then she said several years later, she had a near-death experience. And she said, Raymond, the closest experience I have in life to explaining to you what that near-death experience was like. She said it was that night I walked off the stage after playing that role for so long.
Yeah, that's almost an ego death in and of itself.
Yeah. And that's right.
Wow.
Well, on the topic of near-death experiences, because we are not yet tired of Raymond Moody. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your experience with researching near-death experiences. So, if you'd be willing, and I'm sure you've been asked this question all the time, but just for a little bit of background here,
For our listeners.
can you give a 2-minute rundown on the research of into near-death experiences and what you found?
Yes, basically, I was not from a religious family. I went to the University of Virginia at age 18, intending to be an astronomy major, but took a philosophy course my first semester, and I was hooked. And in reading Plato's Republic, the first few days of college, I found out about near-death experiences because he was interested in them. And that was the first time I'd ever met anybody I understood that anybody took the question of an afterlife seriously. I thought it was kind of like humor or something since I had no religious background. But then 3 years later, I met Dr. George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry at UVA at the time. I was an undergraduate philosophy student then. And I heard from him about his near-death experience. And subsequent to that time, I have interviewed literally thousands of people from all over the world who went to the brink of death and tell us, as you know, that they feel like when they were pronounced dead, they felt their spirit leave their body, and they saw their body from a point of view above and went through a passageway into another world of light and love and feeling absorbed into this light of complete comfort and love and peace, meeting relatives or friends of theirs who had already died and who were there to meet them, and to undergo panoramic memory in which everything they ever did was displayed around them in a panorama from which they witnessed from the point of view, not the point of view they had when they were doing each action, but rather when they were when they saw an action in this panorama, then if they were doing something unkind to somebody, then they would indwell empathically that person and feel the sadness they had brought about. Or if they saw themselves doing something kind-hearted, they would feel the good feelings they brought about with others. So and then when they come back, they tell us whatever they had been chasing before, that, many people chase fame or power or money or any of these other things, or like me, knowledge, which sounds like you two have been down that route too, that whatever they were chasing before, they come back from this saying that what this is all about is learning to love. And that's what they get out of this experience.
Thank you. I think it's fascinating. And I think one of the reasons why the faith that both of us are a part of has been so excited to hear your findings is that our faith has a book called Heaven and Hell, and other books that talk a lot about the afterlife and what happens there and what it's like. And it's fascinating to see the way these experiences that people, the similar experiences that people that come back from the brink witnessed, how they kind of fit together with the ideas of our faith. And so you have some familiarity with Swedenborgian theology?
Well, I have read quite a bit of Swedenborg over the years, not just the spiritual works, but the scientific ones as well.
Oh, nice.
And yes, I have a great admiration for him. I Actually, my admiration of Swedenborg is centered even more. I know about the spiritual, his out-of-body trips and so on, and his visits to the spirit world, but maybe what is not as well known was that he was an early pioneer in thinking also about the prospect of life on other worlds. And when that event occurs, by the latest closest count ever made of the number of stars in the universe puts it at 150 billion trillion stars. And let's be conservative and say that each star has an average of 4 planets. Then that's 600 billion trillion planets in the known universe. And the latest findings from the Kepler suggest that about 1 out of 1,000 of those is Earth-like. So that means that there's on the order of 1 billion trillion Earths in the known universe. And when the first detection of that is made, then a lot of people are going to suddenly get interested in Swedenborg.
Well, it just seemed more common sense to me. Like the chances of us being the only form of life out there, it just seems so small.
It does. It really seems irrational to think that in the universe of 1 billion trillion Earth-like planets, we're the only one.
Right.
So do you think there's been any contact with people from other planets currently?
I don't know. Not that I know of. But just like you, my reasoning is based on the numbers alone. And so they're out there. And what I'm saying is, when we contact them, a lot of people are suddenly going to get interested in this problem, and they will quickly find. Swedenborg, I think, is one of the pioneers.
So I'm curious, in your readings of Swedenborg's stuff, do you have any disparities between what you think about the afterlife versus maybe what Swedenborg wrote in Heaven and Hell or something? Like, do you find any conflicts or disparities there?
Well, I don't. And I think that one difficulty that we face in this whole thing is just language, right? I mean, it's everybody who has a near-death experience says there are no words, right? It's just so far beyond words. And so I'm always, when I think of some thinker and I'm reading their works, I'm always got that in mind, that there's the language barrier there, which they usually acknowledge. So, yeah.
So how does that relate to like what Swedenborg wrote about heaven or hell versus what people say? I get caught up in the language barrier of just like translations sometimes, like reading the Bible is already translated how many times, or Swedenborg wrote his stuff in Latin and having that translated, we must lose, some sense.
Yes, and also it's like, I think that, but the general idea of regions of the afterlife that he has, there are
different societies.
I think that's very accurate. That's what I hear from people all the time, that it's not just one place, it's segmented.
Yeah, so I also was reading some background about you, and I heard that you at least entertain the possibility of past lives and sort of reincarnation. So I'm wondering how that fits into your afterlife worldview, so to speak.
Well, where I am on that
where do you fall these days?
As a philosophy professor, I was, one of the great philosophical problems in the West has been the question of the nature of personal identity. And it started with the pre-Socratic philosophers. And, there was a guy named Hermotimus around 600 BC who, like Swedenborg, had developed the ability to leave his body at will. And the fact that Hermotimus was known to be able to do this was what got these early Greek philosophers thinking about, that humans are made up of a mind and a body, right? And then the question is, which is the primary? And Heraclitus was the first one to say that the soul is the nature of the personal identity. Then it sort of went on, and Plato sort of made official the notion of an immaterial soul as the vehicle of an afterlife. But then in the, say, 16th centuries, 17th centuries, this was questioned by Hobbes, for example, who he said that the notion of an immaterial soul is incoherent. And then so Locke in the next 100 years or so began to talk about how the nature of our personal identity is it's composed of our memories. Well, I tell you, as a forensic psychiatrist, I'm dubious about that. I've seen a lot of trials, and memory isn't all it's cracked up to be.
That's true.
But you know where I've come is, I think that the personal identity of a person is that person's story.
Okay.
Yeah, and what is, consciousness itself is narrative. Think about it. It's like when something new happens to you, what you do is you integrate it into your life story, right? So,
Right. Yeah. Becomes a part of you.
Yeah, the consciousness we have is a narrative consciousness.
And you understand it by means of your life story, right? Like, depending on your framework, you will see an experience differently based on the story you tell yourself of your experiences.
I suppose so, yeah. And so where I am with it, yeah, I do think, whether to call it reincarnation, I don't know.
Sure, terms.
But what I do, and this I have known some of the expert parapsychologists and so on, and these are my dear friends, and this is nothing personal because this is what I say to them face to face. It's like, I just think in 2020, it's ridiculous to think of life after death as a scientific question. It's still a philosophical question, in my opinion, and science is not there yet to be able to determine either way. Well, and so I've read some of the works about reincarnation by my friends but at the same time, Ian Stevenson, if you ever heard of Ian, I loved Ian. He was my dear friend, but he had no critical thinking skills, really. And so I don't trust all that stuff from him. But where I have come up with it is my own two adopted kids, both adopted at birth, and both just, in a chilling way, told us where they were before they came.
Both of them?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it's so funny. Also, another thing about this is that my wife and I don't talk about life after death. We talk about what's for dinner, what's at the movies this weekend, what the homework is tonight,
Yeah.
how to pay the phone bill. And we don't take these kids to any kind of religious services because we live in Alabama and we're afraid of snakes. Hey, that's a joke there. But it's these kids found out about my book Life After Life by reading on the internet.
Really? You had never said.
This is not what, Greek philosophy, you guys, is my thing. It's like all of my friends say, this guy is such a total bore. All he ever talks about is
Greek philosophy.
Heraclitus and Parmenides and Socrates and Plato. And so, that is not my main focus, although it's mainly what I'm known for, right? So but the kids, they have come up with their own opinion because they don't get it from us. And both of them remember where they were before they came to us. And since we don't follow up with questions, if you followed up with questions, then you would you were shaping their story. But we just don't say anything, and so therefore they still, once in a while, they mention it.
Wow. That's really interesting. I like that framework of not asking questions so you don't kind of manipulate the story that they're telling.
Are you willing to share some specifics of what they mention? Is it like a past life on Earth?
Yes. Or? No, this is the first one is my son Carter is Mexican American by heritage. We adopted him at birth from Kerrville, Texas. So he's been, it's like literally the obstetrician delivered him and handed him to my wife.
Oh, wow.
So he's been promissory. And when he was 5 years old, he and I were sitting on the bed and watching TV, and I was flipping through the channels with the remote control. And so when I flipped through what turned out to be the National Geographic channel, he became very animated, and he said, Dad, that's my village. What? So I went back, and it was a documentary about village life in China.
Whoa.
And all of a sudden, he started jabbering away. He said, yeah, remember, before I came to you and Mom, I was with my other mom and dad and brothers and sisters in China. And he could tell that I was shocked, so he went on, and he said, yeah. And he said, and then I was up in the trees looking at you and Mom lying in the grass. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, because sometime before, my wife and I had been in Greece, and we were at an oracle site. We were just off the plane, and we were exhausted, way out in the middle of nowhere. So we were just exhausted. And so the attendant said, just go and lie down in the grass and just take a nap. And there were big trees all around. And what we were talking about was adopting a baby.
Wow.
So there you go. Now,
That's fascinating.
flash
Thank you for sharing
forward. My daughter, Carol Ann, is a Blackfeet Indian from Montana. We adopted her, and those of you who are listening happen to be attorneys know that that's legal, but the exception is if the tribe comes to you, and that's what happens. So
Wow.
we adopted Carol Ann, and when she was about 8 or 9, I guess, she was very definitely an Indian. She loves to take long walks and carries what she called her nature bag, which I guess her ancestors did for thousands of years. But, and again, the same deal. We adopted her at the moment of birth, so she's been with us. And when she was about 8 or 9, I guess, walking along, and we loved to stop at this old wooden bridge about a mile from where we lived. And so just one day, out of nowhere, she said, I don't like this place, plainly referring to the world.
Yeah.
And I was shocked, and I didn't say anything, and she went on to say, she said, yeah, she said, when you die, you just go up and you be with God, and he keeps you up there till all the people you know while you're alive have died, and then he sends you back as another person. And I said, well, what makes you think so? And with her fingertips of both hands, she pointed inward, like behind her eyes, and she said, I just know in my mind. And she said, and I was with God, and he pointed you out to me. And he said, you got to go down to be his daughter. And I said, well, how did you feel about that? And she said, oh, I didn't want to do it. I wanted to stay with my Gotti. But then she thrust her hands out in front of her twice, pushing, and she said, but he pushed me down to be your daughter.
No pressure on you as a parent.
And that's right. And so, I said, well, are you glad you came anyway? And she said, sure. And again, we didn't talk about it, so once in a while she talks about it. She keeps saying, I wonder why they pushed me out of that light. That was the most troubling thing about it to her. But and then going back to the spring of 1981 or 82, I have two wonderful grown sons, and each time I had been wanting a daughter. But then my wife was having trouble with the pregnancy, so we thought, no, it's not good to, for her to try again.
Right,
so
you want to be safe.
That's right. And so I was sitting out on the porch swing one night, and I was not praying. It was like a daydream. It was like literally a fantasy. It was, wouldn't it be great to adopt a Native American daughter?
This kind of came to you.
And then just 19 years later, it came about without anything. A Blackfeet friend of mine just called up and was catching up. And she said, well, how are you doing? And I said, oh, great. We've adopted a baby. And she said, oh, I wish so much I had known you were looking, because she said, on the reservation, I'm the first person in the hospital to know when we have a situation where we need adoptive parents.
Right.
So that's how it came about. And, that's the hand of God to me.
Yeah. So as your kids have gotten older, have those memories of past lives diminished or continued?
No, they haven't. And I think it's because we don't ask.
Yeah.
I think if we had expressed interest in it and all, asked questions, they might have clammed up. But the fact that we just didn't say anything, the fact they do both occasionally bring it up. Yeah, they do.
So how does that picture that they painted fit into your experience and thoughts about what happens after death? And does it blend? Does it mesh with what you think is going to happen, or not in a callous way? Does it like not matter to you because it whatever happens in some regard?
Yeah, well, it does kind of blend in what I think, but the reason it blends in with what I think is I think that my kids have shaped what I think, right? To a degree.
Sure.
And the fact that they both said that, and that both we also had very, very profound reactions to it, because it touched on things that we had already sort of thought, but it's just amazing. This world is just so ephemeral, don't you think?
Well, and I think there's something to be said for just letting whatever happens spiritually, whatever experiences people purport, letting those be what they are. I think we're so inclined to fit something into our model, whether it's scientific or our personal stories, to relate something, that we're not as willing to just accept it. And I think that a lot of the time we have trouble because things that happen extrasensory don't always follow the same laws as what governs our physical world. So we're not going to be able to perfectly fit something that doesn't apply to our scientific laws into our world. So I think there is, again, humility to just let things happen.
Yeah, that's right. That doesn't bother me at all. Yeah. I'm a great lover of science, and then I'm also aware at a deeper level that it's all consciousness.
So I was thinking about this idea, going back to the story of your son, this idea, and it seems like the conversation that you and your wife were having affected your son in some way before he was.
It sounds like, because he said he was watching from the trees, and I remember that conversation very well. We were sort of thinking in a prayerful way about adopting a baby. Yeah, and that's pretty clearly when he came to us. A lot of adoptive parents that I've talked to over the years have had very similar experiences. In the ancient Greek world, you might find it interesting. You know about, of course, through your theological studies, about the mystery religions in Greece and so on, like the Eleusinian mysteries. Well, another mystery in Greece, in that sense of mystery, was adoption. And in the Greek point of view, the adoption was a mystery. And the difference between a biological birth and an adoptive situation was in the adoptive situation, creates a bond on the other side. Yeah, very interesting.
It is interesting.
All right, I'll ask you one final question here. So there's this idea of kind of the effect that your conversation had on your son in the afterlife somewhere. This idea of what we do affecting people in the next life. And I want to ask what your take is on the reverse. Is there a way that people in the next life are able to affect us now?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I know, looking into some of your background, you were interested in types of divination in the past. Is that still something that?
Oh, mirror gazing. Yeah, most of my interest, guys, goes back to ancient Greek philosophy.
Right.
And one of the institutions that had a lot to do with the origin of logic, for example, was the oracles of the dead, because the man Parmenides, who articulated the logical notion of truth, that is, truth is that which is the case independently of what anybody thinks about it,
Right.
was Parmenides, who was an evoker of the dead and an oracle of the dead, and apparently on one of his visits over there got abducted, and a goddess sang a song to him, which is the very first written out logical deduction. So that's how my interest in the oracles of the dead was, from that historical.
Right. So do you think they can affect our lives on Earth?
I don't know. What do you think? What do you think?
I think there's a give and take kind of constantly with where we are with what's happening in the spiritual world, and like the things and thoughts and feelings that we choose to associate with kind of being shared by in the spiritual world as well. So I think,
interesting.
And I'm a big believer in equilibrium and balance, and I think if we can affect the spiritual world can also affect us.
That's
interesting.
And vice versa. That's interesting. Yeah, interesting.
So with your interest in mirror gazing, did you ever have any success, any effect with it?
I did. I saw my grandmother just as clearly as I'm seeing the person sitting in the chair across the room from me now.
Wow.
And I felt her presence. I heard her voice, although it wasn't like it had just a funny sound to it, like an electrical sound.
Oh.
I don't know. But it was, nonetheless, it was auditory. It wasn't just mental.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely, I did.
You know, I think a lot of people see or have experiences with like after-death visitations of grandparents, because there's such a feeling of love and adoration for grandparents and grandchildren. And I think that when looking or even just stumbling across a spiritual experience, that, I don't know, it seems to pop up more than normal. And I wonder if it's because of that love and adoration and just good, warm feelings.
That my grandparents were the biggest figures in my early life, for sure.
My grandma was that for me, and I've had a couple of dreams that seemed a little bit more than just a dream with her in them.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to be respectful of your time, and I know you have to leave.
Well, you guys are just so cool.
Oh.
What a delight being with you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Do you want to plug any of your books? Do you want to direct anyone to a website or anything?
Oh, yes. I would love to plug my new book called Making Sense of Nonsense.
Ooh, I like that.
And I'm hoping that you guys will look at it too, because it's an entirely new way of how to think logically about the question of life after death.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put a link to it where we post this podcast and hopefully send people your way.
Thank you guys so much. It's always such a good feeling to have contact with Brent Athens.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and spend it with us. We really appreciate it.
Great fun.
All right. Well, have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys so much.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys. Thank you for watching and or listening to the Spiritable podcast with Dr. Raymond Moody this time. Again, if you want to follow us.
Before you end this, I gotta say something. We didn't have a visual for Dr. Moody, so I wasn't looking at him.
He's a sweet boy.
And I've realized that I've just been staring straight into the camera for most of this episode. So audience, I was giving you a lot of eye contact.
Richard,
I was staring into the camera. I had to put it out there.
Oh, no.
All right, Luke, our outro, please. I don't know what's taking you so long.
All right. All right. Thank you guys for watching and or listening to our Spiritable podcast today with Dr. Raymond Moody. If you're watching the YouTube version, please leave a comment below if you have any questions, and subscribe and hit the notification bell because it helps us look pretty in Google and YouTube's eyes. If you're listening to the podcast, also subscribe. And if you're... What else do I need to say? All right. And if you want to be on the show, send us an email at spiritablepodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get you live sometime and answer some questions. It'd be a fun time. Richard, you want to say just thanks for listening and have a good day or something?
Nah, that's fine. Later.
Peace out.